welcome to the Real Estate Mogul MD podcast. So thanks for tuning in and taking control of your financial future. This is a show where we not only motivate and inspire, we give you actionable real-world experience to help you live life by design. You'll hear journeys and stories from other physicians, investors, coaches, consultants, and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, Brett Riggins. Hey, everybody. Here we go again. And for another episode here on Real Estate Mogul MD. Today, all the way from sunny California, where the palm trees are just a little bit taller than what I get to see in the Carolinas. But we have a board-certified internal medicine physician who spent nearly a decade providing inpatient care in Southern California, and left his full-time practice in 2020 to co-found Phox Health. Everybody, please welcome the doctor-turned-logistics expert, Dr. Amit Geer. How are you doing, man?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on, Brett, and spending some time with me to share my story and with you and your audience. So thank you.
It's exciting. And just before I always love like the pre-talk, and the listeners can't see obviously, but in this room I'm recording in, there's a Fender Stratocaster hanging up above me, and we got to chat a little bit. So Amit, you've played a little bit of music, and that led us right into the journey of, man, you said you've moved 9 times since you've met your wife, right?
That's right. 9 times since med school to where I am today. And
wow,
each one of those steps is the journey in that process. And, sometimes you have to move for fun. Sometimes you have to move for work. And 9 times is the number so far.
9 times. And typically when I lay that introduction in there, it kind of gives you a feel of where things are going to go. But the listeners have no idea how much more there is to this story just based off of that. So I'm excited whether it's in moving. And again, we've got a 2-physician family. So that creates challenge and opportunity.
Right.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we talked a little bit about, that moving. And I always love to start off just about how, like, what got you started in medicine, and now, moved so many different times and touched so many states that I've been in myself. You talked about Memphis, Tennessee. That's one of our major markets where we invest in real estate. There's an amazing hospital there that I'm sure everybody is aware of. And you've talked about California. You've talked about, Milwaukee. Actually, my first year in college was at Milwaukee School of Engineering myself.
Nice.
So I'm excited to jump into this, man. What was the one thing that was like a turning point for Amit that was said, hey, I want to be a doctor?
Yeah, I still don't know the answer to that question. It kind of started with when I went to college, I chose a degree that basically my dad is a biomedical engineer. I said, let me just give that a try. I wasn't too set. As we talked about before we started recording, is I was playing drums. I was doing some fairly atypical stuff for first generation Indian American, playing drums, playing guitar. I had these dreams of being in a band, and I was also worried about that because in a traditional background, there's only like 3 jobs you can do: doctor, lawyer, or nothing. Yeah. I thought, well, I got to be one of those. An engineer is another one. So I thought, well, let me try this engineering. It seems challenging. And let me stick with the biomedical sciences just in case this med school thing is something that I potentially have to try. And that's exactly what I did. I went to undergrad at Tulane University down in New Orleans. It was an amazing 4 years. It was so amazing. It was probably one of the 3 reasons why I couldn't get into my state-based med school down the street in the University of Tennessee. But after college,
what do you mean? What do you mean by that? It was maybe one of the reasons. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, New Orleans was a fun place to be, and
I thought that's where you were going.
The nightlife, the whole thing, it was a good time. So that was one reason. The second reason was, I chose a hard curriculum. The easy way, or relatively easy way of getting into med school is choosing a curriculum where you can get your 4.0 and move on. And the third reason was the year I started at college is when the Xbox came out, and everyone wanted to play Halo and be competitive and all that. So
there's all kinds of stuff that's keeping Amit from doing his work. Right. And then on top of that, New Orleans being a fun town, right? Man, the music that is in that place is remarkable as well too. Architecture, music, and food. I absolutely love those 3 things in that town. So some things keeping Amit from the studies, right? So you've gotten through the studies. Yeah, you've gotten kind of like this idea of the 3 standards, right? Or 4 is the nothing piece, right? And you're moving on. And was there that trigger moment? We've talked about biomedical engineering going into med school. So what's leading Amit down this path of becoming a physician?
Sure. So, I mean, after I graduated college, had this degree, still didn't know what I wanted to do. And I'd done my prereqs, for med school wise. I thought that option's still there. Do I want to do this? And right after college, one of my best friends from high school said, let's start a blog. This is a novel idea in 2004. Let's start a blog about the entertainment industry, because he was trying to get into film school and I was still deciding what I wanted to do. And so we started this blog. It was basically almost like BuzzFeed was at the time. It kind of is to this day. And it was actually doing quite well. And we were at 2,000 hits a day. We had some advertising coming in. I thought, is this the path I want to go on? And then my parents sat me down and said, if you want to do this, you can pursue this, but you can't be living at home and doing this. You need to go and pursue this. Maybe move to California. At that time, I said, well, I didn't want to take that life gamble at that point and do it. I said, let me try this med school thing. And that was sort of the trigger point. And then I read this quote in a very outdated magazine for someone at my age, Reader's Digest, that said, indecisiveness is the death of destiny. And I thought, if I don't decide or at least try med school, I will never know what my destiny will be. So I said, let's try it. So January 2007, and I got on a plane, and my dad helped fly down there with me. I started med school in St. Martin, and that was the most homesick and the most scared I was ever, because it's med school. Everyone's scared of that. And I was living on an island that was 36 square miles in the middle of the North Caribbean, and I had no idea what to do. And there I was. But the amazing part about that experience on the island is that I had an incredible friend group. They were a study group. They were a life support group. They were great friends. I met my future wife down there. She was a semester ahead of me, and having someone who was a semester ahead of me, I was able to study with her, and that helped us, help me get through it, because I wasn't expecting to I don't know what I was going to do academically. But I think the power of love. I actually graduated early from there, left the island, and went to New York and finished 3rd and 4th year in New York, and started residency in basically 3.5 years. So I quote unquote graduated early from med school.
Wow, that's crazy. The power of love, huh?
Yeah.
Make sure you continue to give your gratitude forever for that one, huh?
Always.
That's awesome. So a 2-physician family again. We're out of med school, and you get into internal medicine. And it's always interesting. I love having these conversations. So, I was just speaking with Dr. Scott Grant, where he had pediatrics in mind and ended up going to pediatrics. But then sometimes we'll see, okay, well, I was thinking about this and I ended up in cancer research or something. So how did you end up in internal medicine?
Sure. So I wanted to kind of still be broad, because I knew internal medicine at least was another gateway to specializing. And I didn't know what I wanted to specialize in. But back in the med school days, it was kind of the first trigger point actually for my entrepreneurial journey. Was I had this idea to text message reminders for patients to take their medications. And this was in 2007. The iPhone was just announced or just released just 2 months prior. And I thought that device is going to be an amazing device. Imagine having pictures of your pills, reminders, you can interact with it. And in that stage, it wasn't even an app store out. The app store didn't come out for the iPhone until the summer of the following year. And I thought that was $1 billion idea, and I got infatuated with that idea to the point where when I started residency, I just chose internal medicine as a good default, just like I almost chose a good default with undergrad. Mm-hmm. And I started pursuing this text messaging reminder app idea. And that was an app called Pillbug. It was an idea to remind yourself to take medications. And I partnered with someone, and I think the story will answer itself as soon as you hear the rest of it. I found this guy on Craigslist, and I said, hey, let's build an app together. Yeah. And I'll give you X% of my company, and I'll pay you X $1,000, and let's build this thing. And through residency, while training, I was working with this guy back and forth. We were designing this app. Slowly, more and more reminder apps started coming out. And then as I finished residency in internal medicine, I still didn't want to specialize in anything. I just wanted to start working. And hospital medicine became kind of my passion in this field. I love the acuity of the patients. I love the on and off schedule. And that on and off schedule is important for me because it allowed me to daydream. And I had this entire soapbox that in boredom, we're creative the most. And in part of the story later is by the time I became a full-time hospitalist, I was incredibly bored, not because the work wasn't hard or I didn't like the people I was working with. Is everything's kind of standardized in medicine is what I talk about. And I became bored. And in boredom, my mind wandered. And that was sort of the next trigger point for the next chapter of my life, which was, becoming a full-time entrepreneur.
So I'm taking the Craigslist relationship didn't pan out, right?
Yeah, it didn't pan out. Yeah, I had to fire the guy in about 3 years and started all over. Had no app. And then while I was in DC, I was at a birthday party. And I meet this guy and I tell him, I'm a doctor. I have these ideas for apps, but I can't program. And he said, well, I know how to program, but I don't have any ideas right now. I was like, great, let's meet up. We met up for coffee the following week. I told him about my pill bug reminder app idea. And he's younger than me. He didn't know the industry and expected me to be a subject matter expert on this. And we spent the next maybe 6 to 8 months actually building that app. And in the summer of 2015, he was moving back to India and I was moving to California at that point. We released Pillbug and it failed spectacularly. It didn't work at all. And as I mentioned by then, there were a bunch of reminder apps. There was no business model behind it. It just wasn't happening. But it's part of that journey that everyone has when you're starting a business, no matter what industry you're in. You have to fail a few times. You can fail spectacularly or you can fail a bunch of little times. But it helps kind of set the idea that you have to keep going. You have to either take that kernel of idea, pivot on it, improve it, or start over with an idea. But you have to build those calluses first before any idea takes off. It's that classic Mark Cuban quote, overnight success takes 10 years. And oddly enough, that's how much it took by the time we met our stride with Phox Health.
Man, I'm telling you what, you like hit me right in the head on these things. And one of the hard things, Amit, seeing this journey. So as a visionary, as what you call a daydreamer, and something in that too, it reminded me of, I'm just wondering, I'm not a neuroscientist, I have no medical background, but if there's something in our brainwaves when they're aligned in our boredom, similar when we are meditating, right? When there's this alignment in your brainwaves, I wonder what's happening in your head when you feel bored, but in reality, your mind is like in a different spot, like their brainwaves are probably functioning. And that's where that creativity is just sparking, right?
I looked into this because I give startup talks on this whole concept of boredom leads to creativity. Is the only person you can talk to when you're bored is you. And when you start talking to yourself, you start questioning what's right in front of you. You start questioning about what happened yesterday. You start questioning about tomorrow. And in that process, that's where ideas form. And unfortunately, in June of 2007, we cured boredom completely. That was the day the iPhone came out. No longer are we bored anymore. And that's to our detriment. Yeah. So whenever I tell people and give advice on coming up with ideas, for me personally, no ideas ever come to me when there's a screen in front of me. Maybe that'll change with the Apple Vision Pro that was just announced, but that's not technically a screen because you're looking through it. But you have to be bored. Go walk the dog or go be like Archimedes and sit in your hot tub for a little while and have that eureka moment. But you have to be away from the screen. It's proven.
So I've got another direction before we go down the neuroscience path, but the sauna. I've started, there's this crazy thing that happens in the sauna where, people get very talkative in the sauna. And it's like in this homeostasis, this fight for homeostasis, I'm thinking it's kind of like it's your body trying to tell you you're about to die. You need to do something. So you start talking really fast and you start exposing all this information. You can sit in a sauna with somebody and learn their entire life in 15 minutes as they're gasping for breath, right? Inside of this fight for homeostasis, what I've been doing, Amit, is almost meditating. So just having earbuds in with different frequencies playing, not a song that I can anticipate or anything like that. I think there's something happening, like what you're saying with the boredom, is like, man, it just gives me goosebumps because the things that have happened in my mind in those moments, in that 10 to 15 minutes, are remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. And it's in that moment of boredom that others can see it as boredom, but man, for me, it's not boredom. It is
Oh no,
It's a connection to the quantum. I mean, it's like into the whole quantum discussion. Like everything is possible, but you've got to be in the alignment to even have that mindset.
that's right. And there's very few fleeting moments in everyone's day where that happens. It really doesn't happen while you're sleeping. It happens when you're brushing your teeth. It happens if you're in the shower, as long as you don't wear an Apple Watch. It happens in a sauna. These are places where you can be bored and daydream. So I don't put it in my calendar, but I have to look for those moments in my day where I can be bored. Walking the dog is a good one. I just put on some droning out music, nothing you can play to or think about the chords to. You just you can drown out the world and think and talk to yourself. People rarely do that these days.
Do you ever listen to binaural beats?
Like so I actually save playlists like lo-fi playlist and binaural sounds, white noise, ocean sounds, even just music that's just there. Because even going through med school, the only way I could actually study was if I had electronic music playing, just background repetitive beats with some melody, and that would help focus my mind and help me stay from having to use any other medications or anything like that would even do that. That was my way of mimicking concentration.
There are some pieces of classical music that I'm not intelligent. I guess I'm not good enough musician to pick up on the melodies and the reoccurring instances. But like Bach has some stuff where it's like this almost it's so unknown to me that it's almost in that same sort of kind of not trance, but it allows your brainwaves to get bored.
Oh yeah. So I actually am a big fan of film scores, so like almost like modern classical through that way. And a lot of these film scores have motifs that are used over and over, and that helps similarly put your mind into a trance state, be bored. You want to get real nerdy about it, like Lord of the Rings soundtrack. There's a couple motifs for the characters and worlds that are in those stories that help kind of push your mind to be bored. And because one, it's familiar, you've heard that tone before, but it's unfamiliar enough to the point where you're not exactly humming to it or picturing every note. And there's no lyrics, so it helps also as well.
Right. So I went into the neuro path, the neuroscience path here.
That's right. You asked the internal medicine guy about neuro.
Yeah, right. And here I am, the construction musician guy, like carrying on too, right? Interesting. Right. But a lot of that comes from like self-development and figuring out, and not only self-development, but self-realization. Like when you can capture this moment and then put yourself in a path where you can repeat it, it's remarkable. We had started talking about this where you have this visionary, like this idea, you go after it, and talking about becoming an entrepreneur. There's downfalls, man. And it's so hard. It's so hard. And you have like this $1 million idea, it gives me goosebumps to think about it. Man, this is it. This is the one. But you got to dig ditches. You got to dig ditches for so long to get there. And if you can't dig a ditch fast enough, guess what? Somebody's going to get there faster. They're going to get there better. All this stuff is happening. But as you're doing this, Amit, you're probably seeing other people just advertising, in 2007, maybe not as difficult but these days when you're an entrepreneur and you're pushing hard, you even have a different job or whatever, you're seeing other entrepreneurs like advertising rainbow and sunshine as the world is great and everything works out perfect. And it doesn't go like that. Even those guys, I mean, it's not happy all the time. It doesn't work out all the time. You got to keep pushing, right?
Yeah, you do. I mean, and we get intoxicated by reading these articles about so-and-so raised X million dollars. But what I found is I stopped reading TechCrunch. I stopped reading those headlines because they are not constructive in whatsoever. They're not a story about what's happening in the real world. If they really wanted to talk about startup life, they should talk about the 9 out of 10 businesses that do fail. What was their story? Why did they fail? Why couldn't they raise money? Not talk about who raises money, because it is intoxicating to hear that some company raised $100 million. And you think, why not me? And you have that fear of missing out. And that fear can lead to making mistakes and spending too much money on an idea that doesn't work. And part of my mantra of being bored, there's another similar caveat to that is it's limitations. And my philosophy is the absence of limitations is also the death of creativity. So we always talk about how is this output of creativity formed? Boredom. and limitations. And what I mean by limitations is, in the startup world, especially, is financial limitations. And as a physician, when I started working, making my first six-figure salaries, it would have been so tempting to use that money to invest in whatever idea I had. And my limit is also my rock, is also my wife. She said, you are not using any of your money
Same thing,
on
yeah.
any of your ideas. One, we still had student loans to get through.
Yep.
And two, she saw all my ideas as a waste of time and money. And at the time, she was right. And so that was a immediate limitation. I had a separate bank account for silly ideas. And until we got our first real customer, there was only $43 in that account. It was next to nothing. And that limitation made me persevere to say, okay, how can I make that $43 get to $86, get to $166? How can we keep increasing that amount each time? And if you're not limited, if someone handed me $1 million check in 2007 when I had the first idea, I would have blown all of it. Someone handed me $1 million check 4 years later with the next idea I had, I would have blown all of it. But through perseverance, limitations, both financially and even my time, this is how I was able to go through my journey. And the time limitation is important because people always ask, well, when did you quit your job? How did you know when to quit? Especially as a physician, who walks away from that? You're already quote unquote set for life. And that was, in any advice I give, and there's a great commercial that Dolly Parton did for Squarespace called 5 to 9. So her classic song of 9 to 5, that's her job. But what do you do 5 to 9 when you come home? If you've got kids, family dinner, of course you got to do that. What about when they're all gone to bed? Do you turn on Netflix and watch a couple shows, or do you sit down there and work on your idea? And my 5 to 9 was actually more of a 6 to 11. Every night I was working on something to help push this idea forward, to help, usher in or find a new client or keep changing this idea until we got to this point. And until I got so busy that 6 to 11 was encroaching on my day, until I got so busy and I realized, okay, if I can do this during my daytime, because I knew we could be successful. And that was my trigger point for walking away from medical practice. I knew, because at that point I'd said, okay, I think I can sell our first health system client, which was Auctioner. If I could do that and working as a full-time physician, imagine what I could do unleashed from working 80 hours a week in the hospital. And that's when I knew the second customer that was potentially there, it was the day I walked away from full-time practice. Not because I had an idea, it's because I had market validation that someone was willing to pay for this service, and I could, I needed to focus full-time on it.
I think that's a great way of using those limits. And I can't remember who was saying or where I had read it, but there's freedom in the limits. Limits creates freedom. That's because right. If I know, like the bumpers up on the bowling alley, if I know I can go here and here, then I can have at it inside those limits, right? I could try to hook it. I could try to do all these different things because I know it's going down the right path. And I've said this with my acquisition team before, and it's like, these are the limits. We need these types of expectations. This is what needs to happen. But guess what? Inside of there, that's where the freedom is. That's where you take your skills, your talents, and just shine, right? You also said, Amit, that your wife was kind of like this boundary too. I share a similar relationship with my wife in that not as much like the realist part of it or the conservative that doesn't have the idea, but how amazing is it to have that dynamic in your relationship where you've got a visionary and a dreamer, and then you've got a realist and a conservative being like reeling you back in. And how many times you have to see, I told you so. But guess what? There's going to be that one time, right? Like Phox Health be like, see, it works. It works, right?
I think my wife's finally seeing that because, there was a point where probably the first and only time I really, quote unquote, lied to my wife. She told me at one point, you need to quit Phox Health. It's not working out. Luckily we weren't spending any of our money on it, as I explained before, but she just saw it as me wasting too much time. And my daughter was, I think, 1 at that time. And so I said, yeah, first of the year, I'll quit. I'm not going to do it anymore. And I lied to her because I knew, I was like, I still have to persevere. There's something here with this idea. 6 months later, we got our first health system contract with Auctioner. And it still wasn't a see, I told you so moment. It was I'm sorry I lied to you, but we have this real customer. Let me work on this. Let me see what happens with it. And then the next big moment was, when I left my full-time job, and I said, I promise we're going to grow this company. It's going to happen. We only had 2 clients when I quit, and now we're close to 15
That's awesome.
clients. And I still had to validate myself, my wife. I had to show her my QuickBooks account. I said, look at it now. It's growing this last year.
Yeah.
And she looks at it, but it's still, and like I said, she's like my $0 investor. I'm beholden to her. I got to prove to her that this is working, because I did take a big life gamble. I never took a life gamble before. I didn't pursue that BuzzFeed like website. I didn't pursue a career in engineering. And I went to medicine. That was a little bit of a gamble, but it paid off after the hard work. But this was still another gamble, and the hope is that it will pay off.
That's awesome. And, this idea of when to walk away and having these parameters in this program, these walls, limits, it's awesome. But man, I can't, that one time where it questioned integrity, like the way that you responded to your wife, is challenging. But it sounds like, you've got somebody there that's loving and reeling you in and saying, keep this. But it's a challenge I know that I face myself, of being that dreamer. I remember having that meeting with my wife saying, hey, this is it. I'm going to walk away from that W-2 job. Are we sure about this? Right. But that relationship of having somebody there to back you and to believe in you. And, so when that person's not there, I'm sure there's a lot of listeners out there who may be the dreamer and may have a partner who is just not on the page with them. Right. And just be like, and that could be such detriment to the relationship. So
it could be a big friction point, because you expect your spouse to support you first, no matter what you're doing. And then after that, your first customer. But if it's not your spouse, or you're still having to convince, and even as I mentioned before, it's tough to convince her from time to time that it's still doing something worthwhile. But once you do have that support, because I wouldn't have left my job if I didn't have her support. If she would have said simply no, I wouldn't have left. I mean, I couldn't argue against that. I mean, We still have a household, we still have a family. And even there's the podcast, How I Built This, with the former CEO of Peloton. He was not an exercise guy. He wasn't a hardware guy, software guy, nothing. He was just a business guy, and he had some success previously. His wife happened to be into spinning. And when he had this idea, she supported him fully, to the point where she was almost his first customer. And I thought, wow, that's a good example of spousal support at the dreamer stage, not even before there's in business, because he failed multiple times trying to raise capital. He even put the Peloton bike on Kickstarter, and that was kind of their trigger point. So it's just a beautiful story, example of spousal support when it's there. And when it's not there, tough, not impossible, as I think we've both experienced, but it's still important.
Yeah. The $0 investor piece keeps coming up in my mind too. And then my lessons through business, and I'm still learning constantly. I will, and there's a book, Next Door Millionaire. I don't know if you've ever read that, but just that spend.
I haven't read it, but more.
And my wife tried getting me to read that for so long. And then I finally read it. I'm like, why didn't you tell me to read it? That idea of things will expand. I think it's Parkinson's law or something. Things will expand to the limit that you give them. So, a lot of physicians coming out of residency get this feeling like they have to have the doctor house, they have to have the doctor car. So as soon as your income grows, then so does your expenses. And that's where we see a lot of struggle with physicians. Again, I'm not a physician myself, just speaking with physicians, researching, reading all of that stuff. That's where we see that growth happen. And it's such the same story in business. Because just like you said, if you had $1 million to blow, guess what? You would have blown $1 million, have the same outcome, more than likely. So if we learn with little, we grow with much, right? Does that make sense?
That's right.
In the business that we were doing, spending 6 figures a month in advertising in our little real estate world, that was a lot. That was a lot of money. So it could quickly go if I'm still spending that. And that's the other challenge too. You got to spend money to make money. Right. And I think I've heard Grant Cardone talk about worry about your income, not your expenses. So there's always this juggling thing. But between you and I and all the listeners out there, I like this $0 investor piece and setting these limits, helping you understand when to walk away. Right.
Right.
And that 5 to 9, 9 to 5 kind of analogy there, 9 to 5, 5 to 9 is great too. I spoke with a physician not too long ago, and she was helping other physicians basically build their business, build their own practice. Mila was her name. And Mila would say how you can ease into this is you would start seeing additional patients when you can, right? When it's legal, when you can do this. So you set aside a day. When you get 5 patients in that day, then you can get another day, right? And then as this starts growing, you can start building this way to then trade your jobs. And to me, with these parameters, what you're talking about here, and that 9 to 5, 5 to 9, what happened with you is like, okay, it's time for me to step away, right? That's just a great way of looking at this. So awesome.
Because that was my schedule. I mean, not those exact time length, because when you are home or on the weekends, what are you doing with that free time? If you want your dream job to be your dream job, what are you doing while your current job is there? And for me, I mean, I had the luxury of, as a hospitalist, I would work 7.5 days straight, and I was off for about 7 days. So that off time, I personally didn't want to work extra shifts. I wasn't driven by making, more money as a hospitalist. I wanted to do something that could scale, because as a hospitalist, that doesn't scale. It's 1-to-1. You have to be in the hospital to earn X dollars. But I wanted to build something where, the classic thing is, make money while you sleep. And for me, I used to have to sleep at the hospital to earn money. And now Kaiser is one of our customers. Now they pay me to sleep at home.
Nice. Very nice. If you're not making money while you sleep, you're going to be working until you die. That's you're
going to be working.
Yep.
I don't mind working until I die. It's a matter of how I work.
You never retire. Yeah, that's the same way. Something you're passionate about, right?
That's right.
Very cool. Hey, if you could go back, say 10 years, what's something that you would tell yourself?
So that'd be 2013. That was 10 years ago. That was the year I graduated residency. If I would tell myself, you're on the right path. Don't change anything about how you're thinking. I didn't want to, because once again, part of this journey is still failing. I wouldn't have told myself, okay, you're going to meet this guy. Don't pay him anything. It's not going to work out. Do this instead. There's so many lessons I would have missed out on at that point. So to give yourself future, prospective advice probably isn't fair. There's beauty in that failure. I would just tell myself, keep going, because that is the path you're supposed to get onto to be successful. And I don't think there's any advice you should give your past self, because it could mess up your future self to even do that. We're going to talk about time paradoxes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was a resident. I was just finishing, about to get my first job. And I would have just said, keep going. You're onto something. That way, I wouldn't have said, hey, you're going to become a doctor. You're going to quit. You're going to be a CEO. Great. How do I do that? I can't tell you. It'd mess it up. I would just say, keep going. It will happen.
That's an awesome.
I won't tell you what it is, but keep happening.
Yeah, that's awesome perspective. It reminds me of my kids watch a lot of the Marvel stuff, and I think Doctor Strange in one of those movies, like Iron Man asks him, "Hey, is this going to happen?" And Doctor Strange is like, right. "I can't tell you, right? If I tell you, it won't happen." Very cool. So that's a very interesting perspective. Now with Phox Health, like I know it's difficult to sum it up, but if you're looking to grow that and add more clients, is there a way that you could sum up Phox Health and let the listeners know how they could talk to you or connect with you about it?
Yeah, so we are a software company that connects health system-based pharmacies to medical courier companies. So it's kind of like DoorDash for prescriptions, except we're fundamentally different in that we do not work with any gig workers. We work with medical courier companies who will sign the requisite paperwork to ensure HIPAA compliance and patient privacy is honored. We work with, as I mentioned, health system-based pharmacies. They're not the big guys like CVS and Walgreens, and they're not the mom and pops. They're in that sweet spot where they have a vested interest in keeping their patients within their ecosystem of services and prescription delivery. And we're not talking about delivering cholesterol drugs or an antibiotic. We do that. The real niche of what we found is delivering specialty pharmacy drugs. These are drugs that are high cost sometimes temperature sensitive drugs that need to be delivered to a patient's home. And these pharmacies are doing it for patients anyway. They have to be delivered. Where we come in is we provide the better software experience for these pharmacies, and we provide an accountable setup with our courier partners. What I mean by that is if the courier company is not performing, we can replace them. And we've done it as fast as 24 hours, replace the entire company. And by acting as the sort of the middleware and middle operations between a pharmacy and a medical courier company, we're sort of connecting the dots. So we're kind of like what's called a marketplace model between pharmacies and medical couriers. And through that marketplace, we have a higher level of data security, accountability, and a better software experience on both sides.
And what I love about
customers
this
are actually pharmacists.
is doctor turned logistics expert. I mean, this is the perfect combination of those years that you've put into this and now turning it into that product, right? That service. So beyond the pill bug, like this is level up. These are the years of experience that Amit has in this world, and now implementing the tech side and building out this service.
Well, it was great because as a physician, we had this program called Hospital at Home, where patients who weren't that sick to be in the hospital, but certainly weren't sick enough to go straight home, they would be admitted to their homes, and a doctor would go out to their house for 2 or 3 days. But part of that treatment process, or that process, was you'd have to get drugs to the patient's homes precisely when that doctor arrived. And one day I was working, and I sent home a patient with heart failure who was supposed to get their treatments delivered to the patient's house. And those treatments never arrived. And I knew very well what the consequence of that was, because that poor lady ended up in the hospital the next day and she had to finish out her stay there. Wow. And there's another clinical scenario in the world of hospice, which are end-of-life patients. Mm-hmm. These patients are on high doses of pain medication to ease the suffering as they approach the inevitable. And timing is very important. And so those two aspects of what we do are what we call high acuity logistics. And when I sit down with another pharmacy leader at a health system, they know my background. It's extremely rare. It's never happened before, where a physician is talking to a pharmacist and telling them how we're going to improve something as innocuous as delivery for them. And they tend to perk up and listen in because they're used to talking to delivery people, or they're used to talking to pure software people. I know exactly what they're going through. And now I know even more so because the fourth person we hired is a pharmacist. He was a former specialty pharmacy manager. So he knew all their pain points. I knew all their pain points as a clinician. And now I'm telling them about software and logistics. And that perspective, I don't think has ever been merged before. And that's how I think largely we've been successful. And to your listeners, I wasn't wearing a "Trust Me, I'm a Doctor" t-shirt during my sales calls. It was "Trust me, listen to my story. Yeah. This is why we're successful." Yeah. And that perspective helped immensely. Not just the 2 letters against my name. It was actually what I've done as a clinician, and then merging that with a solution in the software logistics space.
Yep. Yeah. And that trust wall is difficult to see. And sometimes we think like, now I've always thought, I pretty much live my life in a t-shirt anymore. And I'll have a very important meeting, and it's like, you know what? My t-shirt is what it is. And building these connections, especially this day, is about that connection that you have with somebody. And you can really tell how genuine somebody is in their knowledge. There's certain salespeople that I would love to throw down a hallway when they have no idea what they're talking about. And I just want to say, just leave me alone. I'll do my best. I'll do better just by myself. So that's the trust wall we're breaking up against. But man, Amit, I thank you so much. If anybody out there wants to get a hold of Amit, what you can do is go to Instagram, the Phox Health. So it's at PHOXHEALTH, and the website, right? What's the website that they could reach you at, Amit?
Just phoxhealth.com, PHOXhealth.com. There's an email address at the bottom. I'm on LinkedIn. Surprisingly, I'm the only Amit here on LinkedIn. I don't know how or why. So I'm easily searchable, so to speak. There's only 7 letters to my name. Yeah. Very accessible. Happy to chat with any physician thinking about stepping into the entrepreneurial space. I'm going to tell them, hit the pause button first. Let's talk about this. Yep. Step on my or lay on my metaphorical couch here. Let's have a little psychiatric visit there, even though I'm an internal medicine doc. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk to any budding physician who's interested in entrepreneurial space, because I think the entrepreneurial spirit is not taught in medicine. It's very scientific. It's very black and white, and there's no room for creativity inside of a hospital or a clinic because you could hurt somebody.
Yep.
So creativity has to exist outside of those walls. And I think a lot of physicians are creative, but they just don't have an outlet. Real estate's a big part of a lot of physicians' entrepreneurial aspiration. But if there's even stuff beyond real estate and software and how do you improve this process? How do you find the time for it? Where do you start? I've been through it all, and I can at least save some years. And rather than me talking to myself in 2013, I can talk to you now in 2023 and let you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, hey, man, I really appreciate your time, and everybody out there, thank you for listening. It's been wonderful. If you have any questions for us in the show, any topics, anything that you want us to talk about, you can send an email to info@physicianwealthsystems.com. Reach out to us on any of the social media platforms. We welcome it. We welcome the questions, the topics. I love the opportunity every single week to get to spend time with you guys. Amit, man, from sunny California to the sunny Carolinas, it's been a wonderful
coast
time
to coast. Yeah.
Thanks again. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate the time, Brett, and thanks for everything. And have a great rest of the week and weekend, and take care, everyone.
Awesome. Yes, everyone, have a great day. Whether you're listening to this at nighttime, walking the halls of the hospital, in an office building, whatever you may be doing some exercising. Don't forget, on this particular one, why don't you switch off of here and go listen to some binaural beats. Get bored in the frequency of creativity. Thanks, guys. We'll check you next time.